I'm coming from, I was born in a very small village in the Galilee called Mitzpeh Harashim, which is not just next to Tzfat. Now, for those of you who visited Israel, I think you can imagine in a way it's a little bit similar atmosphere to Youngstown. Very beautiful, very quiet, very peaceful, actually. And for me, all these terrible disasters that are happening around the world, including stuff that happened around Israel, was always seemed like a distant news. And I'll tell you a little bit how I started to do this disaster relief work. In the IDF, even before the IDF, I joined a special program that we call the Service Year, which is an extra volunteering year on top of the 3 years that we have to do for the IDF anyway. So when I was 18, I went to a boarding school to volunteer for kids who are kind of having some criminal problems and drug problems. It's next to Netanya, and it was really an eye-opening experience for me because it was the first time I met this kind of people, and I realized that really, that's my passion. My passion is to do service and to do work, but it's not only about helping others, because what I really felt within doing this service here was that these people who come, who are maybe less privileged than I was, are an amazing teachers and an amazing mentors for me, and I learned so much from them and from different cultures. And after the IDF, I did what every Israeli is doing. I went backpacking in India, and I went to India for 6 months, and after India I went to Nepal. And in Nepal, after trekking in the Himalaya, I met some street children in Kathmandu, the capital. And I started to do some volunteering work with the street children. I did some community theater. I'm playing some music, so I used some music and art to work with them. And I joined another NGO called Tevel B'Tzedek that I started to work with. And I was in Nepal for a few years, but actually my story today starts not in Nepal but in Japan. So after getting involved in this work, you all remember the tsunami in Japan in 2011. And in case you don't remember, that's how it looked like. That picture I took 4 days after the tsunami in a town that was completely devastated. And you can imagine the boat was not originally parking there. In this town, I came there with a rescue team, and unfortunately there were no survivors. The people who were trapped into the tsunami, none of them survived. And among the people who died, and 20,000 people died in the tsunami in Japan, and almost 500,000 people lost their houses, there were 8 children from 1 kindergarten that died. And the children that you see here in the pictures are their friends from the same kindergarten. So I'm wondering if maybe the light, we can take it a little bit off. Is it possible? Can everybody see well the picture? Yeah, it's okay. I think that's better. Yeah. So these cute Japanese children from the kindergarten lost 8 of their friends. Now, Japan is a developed country. They had food, they had shelter, they had everything, but what they didn't have was any kind of emotional support. So when we saw these children, we did a very simple art therapy activity that was used to help children in Sderot, in Israel, to cope with their trauma after being bombed for so many years from Gaza. And we took this big piece of paper that you see in the picture, and we divided it into 4 parts. Now, this piece of paper was about the size of this table, and each part we gave a different title. The first title was Tsunami. The second title was Home. The third title was Hope. And the fourth, Happiness. And we did a very simple thing. We just gave the children crayons and we told them to let it out, to draw whatever they want in each part. Now when these Japanese children, who are usually probably very reserved, not very expressive, unlike Israeli children, when they just saw the word tsunami, they immediately grabbed dark crayons, black colors, dark blue, and they completely erased the word. As if just seeing the word tsunami was, bringing up flashbacks. And in the part where it says home, that's what they draw. They draw their home that was washed away by the tsunami. Most of these children, when the tsunami came, they actually escaped to a higher ground. So they actually seen this 35-meter tsunami washing away everything. And that's what they draw. In the part where it says hope, they painted their town before the tsunami. It was as if their hope for their future was that, things would go back to normal. And in the part where it says happiness, they painted the cherry blossom, pizza, ice cream, the Japanese manga, comic characters, stuff, that makes children all over the world happy. Now, it was really interesting because, when we saw the children, we thought, those children lost 8 of their friends. A lot of them lost their houses, their relatives. It was a natural reaction for an abnormal situation, right? But when the Japanese teachers saw how the children expressed themselves, they were shocked because they said it's actually the first time the children expressed themselves regarding their trauma. They never talked about it, but when they were given the opportunity to let it out through art therapy, they really, really expressed themselves. And that for us was a really eye-opening experience because we realized that not only in Japan, in other disasters in the world, we as Israelis, we know so much about trauma, and we should share this knowledge to other disasters, to other communities suffering from disasters around the world. So let me go back a little bit. So what is Israel? We are an NGO, we're a non-governmental organization. We are not receiving financial support from the Israeli government. We are coordinating our activities with them, but our funding only comes from private donors. And we worked so far in 40 countries around the world, and we've been to every disaster that you can think of. We've been to Haiti, we've been to Japan, we've been to the Philippines, we've been to the Ebola outbreak, we work with North Korean refugees, and we also work with Syrian refugees after the civil war in Syria. And one of the most important things for us is to be there ASAP. Why? Because we know if we want to save lives, we need to go there, and ideally we should be there in the first 72 hours, because this is the real chance of finding survivors. Now, going back a little bit to Judaism, what we're actually trying to do is not only save lives, but to practice the 8th level, which is, I heard, the highest level of chesed, which is actually not just giving people fish, but teaching them how to fish. Or even, if I take this one step further, teaching people how they could build fish ponds or fishing nets so they could support themselves. And this is what we're trying to do. So how do we do that? So this is kind of the 6 core activities that we practice. And the first 3 are what we do in emergencies. So we're focusing on search and rescue, medical support, and relief aid. And it's interesting because, for example, the tsunami or the earthquake in Haiti, these emergency efforts usually take up to 3 months. So in these 3 months, we're really focusing on saving lives and providing medical support. But after this first 3 months, we're trying to provide more of a sustainable community development programs, and that takes time. So not only we're still working in places like Haiti, not only we arrived there, we still work there even 6 years, 5 and 6 years after the disaster, which I think is quite unique for other organizations. One thing that I didn't mention is that, sometimes disasters like the Ebola outbreak or the refugee crisis, it's an ongoing disaster, it's an ongoing trauma. The refugees keeps coming every day. The Ebola, until basically last week, for more than a year and a half was in West Africa, and still there actually in Guinea, and there were new cases in Liberia. So these are ongoing disasters. So in this ongoing disaster we have to do the two things. We have to provide emergency support, but also look into the long-term needs. And here are some of the programs where we work. This is actually the group of Japanese teachers that I was telling you about. After we supported the children, we started to train the teachers. This is Tali, our Israeli Jewish doctor from Tel Aviv, holding a Syrian baby who lost his mother in Greece. That was just taken last month. This is me in the Philippines a week after the typhoon 2 years ago. And I'm standing in front of a school that was completely devastated. This is one of my colleagues in West Africa in the Ebola epidemic. This is again the Ebola epidemic. This is the recent earthquake in Nepal. Now I told you I used to live in Nepal, so I can speak the language. And for me, when the earthquake in Nepal took place in April 25 this year, I really almost felt like something happened in Israel. So I arrived there in 2 days. This is actually from Hurricane Sandy, not so far from here, where we also sent a relief team to work together with the Jewish and the non-Jewish community in New Jersey to provide relief and support. So where do we start from? Saving lives. Now this picture is really interesting because this is again the Syrian refugee crisis, and we're seeing 5,000 to 7,000 people arriving on rubber boats every day. Now, I know refugees is a very political issue, and now in the States, and especially after what happened in Paris, which is a terrible tragedy. But for us, it's mostly a humanitarian issue. We see these people, we see thousands of women and children arriving every day, and we focus on trying to help them save their lives and recover this, go to the recovery process. And this picture is interesting because on the left side here you see Tali, this is the Israeli Jewish doctor. But here, this is Majda, who is actually an Arabic Israeli nurse from Nazareth, who is working with our team. So half of our team members within the Syrian refugee crisis are now Arab Israelis. Now you think about it, it's quite an interesting scene because you see our Israeli identity is quite clear. We have the big Magen David. The name is Israel. We're not hiding that. And the first thing these Syrian refugees see when they arrive on the boat on the beach in Greece are these Israelis. They probably think they took the wrong boat. But it's even more interesting because some of our staff are Arabs and they speak Arabic, and actually the dialect that they speak, the Arabs in northern Israel speak, is very similar to the Syrian dialect. So Majda and our other Arabic team members are talking to the Syrian refugees and explaining them, no, yes, we are Israelis, Jews and Arabs together, we came to help. And it's really a shocking experience for the Syrian refugees. They always thought, they will always learn that we're monsters. And then the first Israeli and Jews that they see in their lives are people who are actually pulling them out of the water and providing them with medical care. This is Naama, another team member who was actually swimming almost 500 meters in the sea to a Syrian boat that collapsed. This is something that we're seeing on a daily basis now. We work very closely with the UN. And the UN estimation was that the flow of the refugee will slow down because of the winter. It's getting really cold, so people would probably rather stay in the refugee camps in Jordan, in Turkey, in Lebanon. But actually, we're seeing more and more refugees coming every day. And we think the reason is, and we actually asked a lot of the refugees, and they told us that they feel it's like a race. Especially after what happened in Paris, they feel like if they don't go now, the gates will be closed. And I visited Berlin also because we're also starting to do a project to support the refugees in Germany. And it's unbelievable. It's overwhelming. Again, you think the Germans are organized, but they really have no idea how to deal with this crisis. Now, this is a kind of interesting picture also, because again, you have Tali, the Jewish doctor from Tel Aviv, Majda, the Arabic nurse from Nazareth, and a Syrian baby and mother suffering from hypothermia, and we are treating 20 to 30 cases of babies suffering from hypothermia on a daily basis. Going back to another part of the world, Nepal, quite a unique story. We're getting close to Hanukkah and Christmas. And this lady that you see with me in the picture, her name is Krishna. And Krishna, before the earthquake in Nepal last April, she was working as a cleaning lady in a guest house in one of Kathmandu's slums. And hi, welcome, thank you for coming. No worries. So Krishna, when the earthquake happened, she was working in her guest house, and the earthquake happened around 12 p.m. on April 25th, and the whole building of 5 stories collapsed on her, burying not only her, but 22 other people. Now, I told you, for me, Nepal was really like a second home. When the earthquake happened, I was actually in Japan for a program to support the tsunami victims, and I immediately came to Nepal after 2 days. And I started to assess the situation, and we sent a rescue team from Israel of 15 members, men and women. But there was a big problem. There was some technical problems with the airport in Kathmandu, and the team could not land until the 4th day. So 4th day, it's after the first 72 hours, so already the chances of actually finding survivors were close to 0. But still, we tried, and I found this building, this guest house, and I talked to a lot of community members, and they told me that there were 22 people buried underneath. So 22 people, there was maybe a chance of finding survivors. So we started to dig under the rubble, and we started to pull out dead bodies. Children, elderly, men, women. We pulled out one by one, and we reached the 23rd person. All of them were unfortunately dead. But we couldn't find the 22nd person. The 4th day passed, the 5th day passed, and in the morning of the 6th day, when we were really digging deep, almost 15 meters, a tunnel of 15 meters inside the rubble, we used a special life detector that could recognize very sensitive sound. And our commander, the commander of the team, he actually recognized that there is a 30% chance that we are recognizing human breath. And he told me, he asked me if I could crawl inside this tunnel and scream in Nepali language if there's anybody in there. He said it might be, if this person is alive, maybe the breath will be faster, there might be a chance of recognizing a person. And I crawled inside, and I was terrified because, if I move my right hand here, the whole thing will collapse not only on me, but also on the other team members and on the potential survivor that's there. And I crawled inside, and when I reached the deepest point, I screamed something that sounds like "Ya Koko Nuncha," which means in English, "Is there anybody in there?" And unbelievable, down from the deep, a whispering voice of a lady, Krishna, was whispering the word "Dukcha." Dukcha in Nepali means "I'm in pain." And not only she survived, she was able to make a sound after 130 hours after the earthquake. And she was the last survivors of the earthquake in Nepal, and she was able to direct our team where exactly she was located and trapped. And we pulled her out, and I want to show you a small video of how that looks like. Okay, it should work in a second, but I'll just tell you that the picture that you've seen before was actually taken 2 months after, and after we were able to rescue her, I'm sure you probably all heard about the IDF field hospital. Okay, now it's working. It's at play. That's me speaking Nepali to her, and that was after she was found, and I telling her to stay in one place and ask if she understands. And the video was taken from a GoPro camera of one of our team members. Now the interesting part is that after the news was spread that we found a survivor, maybe we can take out the light? Just a second. After the news spread, all the media and teams for 15 other countries arrived to the place. So remember the picture that I showed you of how she looked 2 months ago? You can see how she looked when we pulled her out. And we evacuated her to the IDF field hospital where she received emergency treatment. Actually, we didn't have a clue if she actually had a chance to survive, but the doctors did an amazing job. And see again how she looks today. And she's back with her 2 children in the village. That's her. That's Krishna. Miracle number 2. This is Iris, our Israeli Jewish doctor, also from Tel Aviv, a very beautiful doctor who works with us in Greece with the Syrian refugees as a volunteer. And the baby that she's holding is actually a Syrian baby. And the story was that a 9-month pregnant Syrian lady arrived on the beach in Lesbos, Greece. And as soon as she reached the beach, her water broke. And Iris, together with our nurse, helped deliver the baby. And the baby, Baruch Hashem, thank God, is healthy. And that's how it looks today. Miracle number 3. This is quite an interesting story. This guy who's hugging Iris, our doctor, a Syrian refugee, he was actually not so shocked to be, helped by Israelis. And he told us, it's not the first time I'm receiving support from Israelis. I said, what? Apparently this guy was fighting against the Assad regime as a rebel next to the Golan Heights. And he was wounded very badly and was evacuated by the IDF to Rambam Hospital in Haifa, where he received intensive treatment. Then he was released. He went to Jordan. From Jordan he escaped to Germany, and on the way he was injured by a shipwreck, and then he received treatment from Iris. So he told me, oh, you're Israelis, you're everywhere. It's another interesting story, and of course we are in contact with him on Facebook now. He just arrived to Germany. This is some food and water distribution that we're giving the refugees. This is actually relief items that we're providing in Iraq and in Kurdistan. Now the Kurds don't have any problem with Israelis, the opposite actually, but we are very careful there. So my colleague who's there is not using the t-shirt of Israel because we don't know who is looking and who might be there. It's kind of scary. This is from Nepal, and this igloo type of housing was made and designed by an Israeli architect with a Nepali engineer. And when the earthquake happened in April, the most stressful thing was to find houses for almost 1 million people, because the monsoon in Nepal is very aggressive and it starts in June. So we had less than 2 months to build million houses. Of course, we couldn't ourselves build a lot, but we designed this model and we built 1,200 of these houses everywhere. And let's see if this video works, because I want to show you how that looks like. And the really nice things about it is that we're using local materials like bamboos that you see here. We trained local teams so they could build it for themselves, and it only cost $150 to build one of these. $150 and you get a house for 6 people. You can see there is a transparent sheet on top of it so the sun comes in. And there are some cement to keep it very stable. Actually, many of the locals told us it's a little bit better than the house they had before. True story. So this is in the Himalaya. And now we're going back. Okay, good. This is a really interesting initiative that started by Free Mothers in Israel. And when they saw a lot of the Syrian mothers going around all over Europe, they saw that they're carrying their babies. They have such a long way to go and they don't have the baby carriers. So a lot of these mothers, their children are already grown up, but they all have these slings, these baby carriers. So they opened a Facebook group that you can look up. It's called Slings for Refugees. And they started to collect these baby slings and send it to us in Greece. And in 1 week, I think they collected more than 700. And when we started to distribute it for the Syrian mothers and fathers, this is really the thing they appreciate the most. And I've been working for disaster relief for more than 10 years now, and many people always want to send us donations, clothes, food, and to be honest, most of the time it's counterproductive because it's too heavy, only the shipping costs more. But these slings are actually very light. Each one of them weighed about, I don't know how much is it in pound, but about 200 grams. So it's really, something that's very light and very, very meaningful for these ladies. And these Slings for Refugees Facebook group was open to a lot of mothers all over the world, and mothers from the States, from Europe. All of them are sending Slings for Refugees, and I think as of last week we received already 3,500 of those. And just so I am a feminist, but just showing that there are some fathers who are also helping with that. So this Syrian father also received the sling, a good modern papa. But now let's look a little bit about our long-term work. So after the first emergency phase, or when the emergency phase, like the Syrian refugees, is an ongoing one, we also want to see how we can teach people how to fish, right? So we're starting to train people. We work with the local governments. We have partnerships. We use a method that we call training of trainers. So not only training people who could do the work, but actually training people who could train others. So we work with the governments, with the Ministry of Health, Education, Welfare and Gender. We form very strong relationship with UN agencies, with government, with academy, with NGOs. And we really try to look what is the unique Israeli know-how in emergency relief. So the trauma care is one. Agriculture and water technology is other. A lot of health and education initiatives. And actually one of our best resources is a team of about 135 international specialists, including psychologists, doctors, nurses, social workers, people who, most of them have their own job in Israel, in universities or in hospitals, and they come 2 or 3 times a year as volunteers. And as volunteers is extremely important because we're bringing really the most professional people, but they really cost us very little, because we only have to cover the logistics and costs. So with a very limited budget, we are now able to work in 17 countries and provide very long-term and sustainable programs. So we're focusing a lot on the psychosocial support, and I want to share with you some case studies. This is actually another art therapy program that we did for Syrian children in the refugee camp. And these are some of the images. Now this is quite graphic. This drawing was made by an 8-year-old Syrian girl, and she actually drew the journey that she and her family had to go through. So that's her and her mother and father getting on the boat from Turkey to Greece. That's the boat. Some people, some of her relatives died on the way. And that's our medical team and rescue team helping on the other side. Now again, of course, we didn't ask this girl to draw her journey, her trauma, her pain. We just gave her paper and crayons, and that's what came out. This is even more graphic. This was made by 15-year-old Muhammad from Syria. And on the left side, you can see ISIS beheading, and he told us that ISIS beheaded half of his family. And he saw it in front of his eyes. And then they escaped to another city, Homs in Syria, where the Assad regime was actually throwing rockets from the sky, on the right side. And again, we never asked him to paint the war, but when we just gave him the opportunity, that's what came out. Now, our psychologist, Jamal, from Kfar Kana in the Galil, was asking him, Muhammad, you know, ISIS on one side, the Assad regime on the other side, what were you doing? He said, I was just running in between, until him and his uncles, who are the only survivors from his family, was actually escaping to Turkey and then to Greece. This very cute Japanese little girl lost her mother in the tsunami, and for 2 months she didn't speak to anyone. She ate, she slept, she was surviving, but she didn't communicate. Now I can play guitar, not professionally, but I can play a few chords. And we did some music therapy session with other children and the teacher. And I saw that this girl was really interested, not in me, but in the guitar. And I invited her to play with me. And I acted as if my right hand was in pain, so I asked if she could. I was holding the guitar in my left hand, and she played instead of my right hand. She was really getting into it, slowly. And then I asked her if she could teach me a Japanese children's song. So she started to sing, and I tried to sing and imitate her. And now I can speak Japanese, but at that point it was I couldn't speak a word. And of course I made a lot of stupid mistakes. So she started to make fun of me, and she started to laugh. And then her teacher and social worker who was there just saw it, so I invited them to join, and they started to work with her through music, and slowly she was able to communicate again. This is a really unique picture for several reasons. This lady here is an Ebola survivor. Now again, I was just sharing with some of the members here, when Ebola, we all remember the panic, right? And for me, the Ebola was interesting because when the first Ebola case arrived to the States was exactly the day when I arrived to Sierra Leone in West Africa, and I was there for almost 6 months. And we all remember the panic. And of course, when I first came there, I was terrified to touch anybody. I didn't know if I could even touch a table, because maybe Ebola patient touched it before, and there was a whole fear of maybe it's airborne. Crazy situation. But what we didn't hear about was that there was a lot of Ebola survivors. At some point, about 50% people who contracted Ebola actually survived. And this lady here, Fatmata, is one of them. And we saw that a lot of the Ebola survivors were so stigmatized by their communities. And not only by the communities, by the international media, by the international community, because people were scared. But actually the doctors said, and there's a lot of researchers that shown that the Ebola survivors are actually immune. So we decided to do a support group for Ebola survivor. And it's very interesting. First of all, this lady, her name is Fatmata, and she's a Muslim. In Sierra Leone, 70% of the population is Muslim. And it was also for her the first time she's seen Israelis. And again, it was an eye-opening experience for her to see that we're not monsters, and that we didn't bring Ebola. And apart from that, it was also really interesting because of the fact that the Ebola survivors are immune, we did a lot of games with them that they were able to touch each other. Now, in West Africa, in Sierra Leone in particular, they're a little bit like Israelis. They love hugging, they love touching, and for more than a year now, because of the Ebola outbreak, you could see signs everywhere that says ABC, avoid body contact. So this was really a traumatizing experience for them, not being able even to shake hands. But the Ebola survivors, through our activities, were able to play, laugh, and hug each other, which was a really, really empowering experience for them. In Nepal, after the earthquake, one of the things, in Nepal in the Himalaya, there's no electricity, there's no internet in most places, and the main way to deliver information is from using theater and drama. So having lived in Nepal for a few years, and I really know the local culture, so we took a group of Nepali actors, and together with an Israeli psychologist, we wrote a play in Nepali language that talks about how children behave after trauma. A lot of children after trauma, they wet in bed, they go through regressions. And we took this play out to the Himalayas and we performed, and it was such a huge success that over the course of 2 months, 25,000 people came to watch the play. This is another program that we did also for the Ebola, where we used Israeli technology, and we worked together with an app company to develop an application to help doctors and nurses measure their levels of stress, and why it was so important in the Ebola outbreak. In one hospital, for instance, in Sierra Leone, 35 doctors and nurses died of Ebola. 35 doctors and nurses in only one hospital. Now you can imagine that the other doctors and nurses were terrified. They were so stressed, and of course they lost a lot of their colleagues. So we designed this app, and we gave it to doctors and nurses, and they used it to check how stressed they were, because it was very clear that people who are more stressed are more likely to make critical mistakes when dealing with Ebola patients, and therefore are more likely to contract Ebola. So it's very interesting use of technology to help the fight against Ebola. This is actually in the Philippines, where we train local teachers. I'll skip it. This is also a stress management program for nurses and doctors in the Ebola. This is a program we did in Nepal now to help women to learn about beekeeping using Israeli special technique. This is an interesting program that we're doing for North Korean refugees in Seoul. After they escape from North Korea, they can't go from North Korea to South. They have to go all the way from China to Thailand, and it's very dangerous. And North Korea is a real tragedy, because we only hear about it in the political perspective. We hear about this crazy lunatic guy, Kim Jong-un, that sits there, but we don't really think about the millions of people who live in this country. And very few of them are actually able to escape, and we work with them in South Korea. And when I heard the stories from the North Korean refugees, when I heard the stories of the labor camps in North Korea, I couldn't stop thinking about my grandparents when they were in the Holocaust in Hungary. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors from Hungary. Now, I'm not comparing the Holocaust to the North Korea, but there were some similarities that was so terrible to think about, especially, due to the fact that this is still happening as we speak now. Now, how is all the work that we're doing all over the world, in North Korea, in the Ebola, with the Syrian refugees, how it all connected to Israel? In different ways. But one of the ways that we were able to make a lot of interesting friends. So in case you didn't recognize, Sean Penn, the actor, is working with us very closely in Haiti. He has his own charity, and our team and his team arrived to Haiti same day, and we built together a refugee camp and a field hospital. And we still work together there 6 years after. And the friendship became so strong that Sean decided to come to Israel for the first time in his life, and he's actually coming next week. And he's going to be the keynote speaker in a conference that we're organizing in Tel Aviv about Haiti. And again, he's might not be our typical friend, but he became a very close Israelite friend, and I have to babysit him next week. So good luck to me with that. I think that would be another disaster. The Pope receives here a token of appreciation from our board member, which is actually a handcraft created by a women group from Haiti. The lady next to me here, you probably don't recognize her, but her name is Sia, and she's the first lady, the wife of the president of Sierra Leone. And when I met her, it was the end of September 2014. I told you when the first case of Ebola arrived to the States. And she was so moved. She told me, how come a small country like Israel, you have so much of your own problems, how come you send a team to help us in the Ebola? And she told me that the first country she's going to visit when Sierra Leone will be declared Ebola free is Israel. Now the good news that I was just sharing with some of the members here that you probably didn't hear about is that Sierra Leone was just declared Ebola free as of last week. And I just got an email from her assistant a few days ago that she is planning her visit next month to Israel. Prince William, I met him last March, I think it was. He came to visit Fukushima area in Japan. He didn't come to visit our program, but when he met the teachers in Fukushima, they told him about our program, and he was very interested, and he asked to talk to me, so I had a really nice chat with him about the program. He was very impressed how we help the children cope with the trauma. This guy, not a typical friend, because he's the chief of child protection to UNICEF. His name is Matthew, he's South African. And when he joined our program to support Ebola victims, he was so impressed that he decided to fund it. And now some of our programs in West Africa and South Sudan are funded and supported by UNICEF. And again, I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are aware about the challenging relations that, as Israelis, we're having with the UN. But UNICEF is actually became one of our main partners. But above, the political and building friends, for us it's even more important, and we see how these terrible tragedies and disasters are also an amazing opportunity to build bridges between people. And that's again Majda, our Arab-Israeli nurse. And this picture is really interesting. On the right side you see Warda. Warda is a Muslim Bedouin social worker from Israel who works in our team, and she's hugging a Syrian lady who lost her son. Now, why are they smiling? The reason they're smiling is because on that day, it was just after Yom Kippur, and it was the Muslim festival of Eid al-Adha, one of the most important Muslim festivals. And we arranged, funded, and organized the festival, the Muslim festival for the most vulnerable cases of Syrian refugees who lost their relatives. So that's they're making salads for everyone, and there was lamb and the whole thing. So it was a really unbelievable experience and an amazing opportunity to build bridges. The lady here receiving CPR from Majda, our nurse, is also a Syrian lady. But when she woke up, of course, she was shocked to receive support from Israelis, but she told us that her father was actually a Palestinian refugee who escaped after the war in 1948 to Syria. And he was in the Yarmouk, which is really the biggest Palestinian refugee camp in Damascus. And then it was bombed by both ISIS and the Assad regime, and they escaped to Greece. Her father passed away a few years ago, but she escaped, so she's a Palestinian descendant. And you can imagine how confusing this experience was for her to receive CPR and that her life was saved by our team. Very confusing, but also an incredible opportunity for building trust and bridges between people and between enemies. And going to a different kind of bridge, this is actually our work with the Jewish communities here in the States. Now, a lot of people ask me, why do we spend resources on bringing relief teams to the States? You know, we sent team to Hurricane Katrina, we sent team to Hurricane Sandy, we even sent a team now to the recent flooding in South Carolina, not so far from here. And we recognize that we're not putting so much resources into that, but we think we have some stuff to contribute, especially in being able to mobilize teams of volunteers on the rescue efforts. But more important, we think it's an incredible opportunity to build relationship and trust and bridges between people. And this is the Jewish community in New Jersey, and we mobilized more than 500 Jews and non-Jews volunteers in New Jersey after Hurricane Sandy. This is a team from Oklahoma that joined us after Hurricane Katrina. So again, an amazing opportunity to build bridges between people. This guy here is actually a really interesting story. His name is Soru. He's from Japan, from Fukushima, and he received a lot of support from our team. And then he decided to join us in Nepal. So he's a Japanese kid receiving support in Japan and came with our team to Nepal, and that's him helping building shelters in Nepal. So it was an incredible opportunity for him to grow and to get involved in humanitarian work. And before I conclude, I want to share with you a quote from a Syrian refugee. Now, I had no idea, I never met Syrians in my life, but what really was surprising for me is to see that a lot of them were quite highly educated, a lot of doctors, engineers, business people. And this quote is from a Syrian doctor who came together with his wife and two young daughters. And after this first shock of being pulled out by Israeli volunteers, he told me, my worst enemy became my biggest supporter, and the people who are supposed to protect me back home are now chasing me away. And it made me realize two things. First of all, these people, the Syrian refugees, they're in a huge identity crisis. Their government had been killing them. A lot of their religious leaders on the extreme side were slaughtering them. And then Israelis are helping them. Very confusing, but an unbelievable opportunity to change people's mindset, to build bridges, to build trust, and to build peace, people to people. And especially now with what happened in Paris and with what happens in Israel on a daily basis, I believe this is really, really crucial. Thank you very much.